So it's no shock to anyone that I use Atom paints in almost every single one of my many builds, and I absolutely have loved Atom paints since Ammo released them, and I've used them on a variety of different applications between skin tones and all the different models that I've made. And today I want to show you about this new product that Ammo has come out with called Ionic. And they actually partnered with Big Child Creatives to create this paint, and this paint set and this paint line is more specifically suited towards figure painters, figure modelers, miniatures, big scale, you have it. It'll work for these applications. So what makes Ionic so special? They say there's a lot of pigment, the colors are very saturated, it's self-moisturizing, self-leveling, and they're saying it basically is the jack of all trades paint. And to me, when I look at it, it reminds me of the Pro Acryls. It just seems like a paint that's just a good all-rounder, because Pro Acryls are great for brush painting and airbrush painting. So I'm going to use my wet palette and this Marta Kolinsky brush from Ammo to do a lot of the testing today. Now, when I spoke with Ammo, who had reached out to me and asked me to test this paint for them and do a little review, they had made it pretty clear that this was more so meant for brush painting, but that I could airbrush with it. And I wanted to test it out for myself. Of course I was interested, because again, I love Atom paints, and I thought, well, if these things are anything like Atom paints but just as nice for brushing, well, then this is a serious contender for Pro Acryls. So here's what that comes in the new pack. So this is actually the starter pack, and what the first thing I noticed is that the O is the same in Atom and Ionic. So I was like, okay, so this just seems like, you know, the successor, if you will, to Atom paints, and by that I mean it's like just another version of it. And from what I can tell, it does seem like a different formula for Atom paints, but mostly just thicker, and we're going to talk through that. But this basic set comes with a nice round amount of colors, just enough to get you started. But the nice thing is they do have an entire range, which they did send me some information on. But the first thing I noticed is that the colors are very, very saturated. They're very, very vibrant colors. And you can see there's well over 100 colors that they offer in this range. Now, for my military modelers, this set really isn't going to be for you unless you're looking at painting your figures. One thing that jumped out at me that I wasn't able to test in time for this video was the metallics. Because if anyone is not new to my channel, so all of you that have been here a while, you know I love the Atom metallic paints. And I wasn't able to test the Ionics, but I'm sure they'll be just as good. So one of the things I really like about this line that Ammo has done is that they have this nice flip cap, which makes it really easy with one flick of a finger to take the cap off and actually put your paint in, like your cup or on your wet palette. The Pro Acryls twist off, I really don't like the lid of the Pro Acryls. I don't like that I have to twist it because it requires two hands. And I'm going to show you my biggest pet peeve about the Pro Acryls. But I want to show you this first. I put some Atom paint down on the wet palette, and look how much thicker the Ionic is versus the Atom paints. I'm going to show you that again here with some of the purples, but I just want to show you the Atom paints are really great for airbrushing. I love them for airbrushing. I use them on literally every model that I paint. And these Ionics are very, very thick right out the bottle. To me, it seems like a much thicker version of the Atom paints, and so far that's what it seems. The Pro Acryls are kind of somewhere in between the Atom paints and the Ionics in terms of how thick they are. You can a lot of times use Pro Acryls right out the bottle on a wet palette, which I do like that about them. With this tip, I hate how there's always a little bit of paint left over. Like when you close that up, there's always paint on the tip. So like it's a waste of paint. You have a risk of getting that paint somewhere else. I don't like the Pro Acryls like tip. I don't like the cap at all. I love Pro Acryl paints, I do. I just hate that bottle. Really, that bottle design, I just absolutely hate it. So here we can take a look at the purple, and to me, I chose some colors, and you'll see almost all the colors today, but I really wanted to focus on some of the more vibrant colors. And purple stood out to me because, again, here we go with that cap on Pro Acryls. The Ionic paints were so much more vibrant for the same color, like purple, magenta, I think they were all magenta is what I picked. And you can see how the Pro Acryls are a very flat color. The Atom paints are more vibrant, but the Ionics I think were a little bit more saturated. And again, you'll notice how much thicker the Ionic paints are compared to the others. It's very, very thick right out the bottle, which really made me worried for the self-leveling that they claim, but we're going to look at that later. I'm going to test the self-leveling of this. We're going to test the self-leveling, we're going to test the saturation, we're going to test how well it covers, like what kind of coverage we get. We're going to test airbrushing. So we're going to give these the full gambit of what I use every day on my models to truly see if these are worth the money. So what I'm doing here is I'm prepping these colors for painting because we're going to test these colors on a few parts, spare parts that I have already primed up and ready to go. But what I noticed is all three of these colors are a little thick for brush painting when you first put them on a wet palette, so I added some water in and I'm just mixing them. So you can see that I'm trying to keep the consistency about the same. So that way we kind of rule out any of the issues with that. So just starting with red though, so we're going to use the red and the purple. That's why I wanted to show you the difference up front, because we're going to be painting Magneto's boots. And Magneto is red and purple. So we're going to start with Ionic, just because I want you guys to see how nice this paint is. Now obviously I did this test many weeks ago, and I've been using the Ionic paints ever since because I like them so much. Again, for brush painting, they're really nice. You can see how I'm getting one coat of coverage here with this red, and it's just going down beautifully. There's no gaps, there's no like see-through, it's not too thin, and again I use the same amount of water. And unfortunately, you know, sometimes I move and don't always capture the way I want to, but I want you guys to be able to see how nice this paint goes down. Now this is the red. Not all the colors go down this nice, as we'll see. The purple does require 2 coats, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. I just want to focus on how well this goes down. It's very smooth and it has a nice finish. There's no tide marks, there's no brush strokes. I'm very impressed. I'm thinking back to the days when I used to start painting with like Vallejo paints, and I didn't thin them very well, and I'd get terrible tide marks and like ripples and waves. Just didn't work really well. Now here I'm using the Atom, and I'm just doing this to compare, because the Atom paints are already thinner because they are meant for airbrushing. You can brush with them, as you can see here, but they are definitely thinner, and you'll notice that right away that these are definitely a thinner paint. I don't use Atom for brush painting all that much because it is thinner and requires more coats. Doesn't mean it's not good. I absolutely love the metallics for brush painting. I use it all the time on my models. I use the metallics, it's great. So then we'll move on to the Pro Acryls. And Pro Acryls I've been using for quite a few months now, specifically for brush painting. I have airbrushed with them very, very rarely, but they do airbrush just fine. But I just wanted to compare, because again, as I'm reading through the Ionic manual, like if you will, the brochure of information, it just keeps screaming, this is our competition to Pro Acryls. It just seems like that's the case. And that's why I wanted to compare. I want you guys to see the difference versus Atom versus the Pro Acryls. Now, if you're someone who is like, I've used ammo paints before and I hated them, and you're talking about the OG ammo, these Atom paints are totally different. I mean, this formulation is like, it might also not even be called ammo. Like, it's a totally different formulation, and I absolutely love them in comparison to the old OG ammo bottles. So that being said, moving on to the purple Ionic, you can see that you're getting good coverage, but you're still getting some spots where it's like white still coming through with the purple. Maybe you might call this coffee staining, something similar to like what you see on the Citadels and the speed paints and stuff like that, because you're kind of getting accumulations in the center and it's almost acting like a contrast paint. But it's just happening on the purple. I didn't notice this on a lot of the different colors, but again, this is just something that is inherent to brush painting or just painting in general. You can't always get one coat of coverage. But as you'll see, I'll come back with a second coat, and after 2 coats, it's nice and uniform, which is what I want. One of the things I struggle with sometimes is you can put down 5 coats of something and it doesn't get good coverage. But with this Ionic, after 2 coats of purple, it looks perfect. But we'll come back to that in just a moment. You'll see that. I wanted to compare apples to apples, though. I didn't want to put down 2 coats of Ionic and then put down 1 coat of, Pro Acryls and say, oh, well, look, Ionic is better. Well, no. We need to look at apples to apples comparison. So here I'm actually painting with the Atom purple, and I said it's nice, but it actually isn't as vibrant as the Ionic purple, right? It's just not as nice. So again, I use these Atom paints for airbrushing because they're better for that, in my opinion. Again, you can brush with them, but they're not perfect for brushing. And I think these Ionics really fill that void, and quite frankly, with how well they airbrush, which we'll get to that later, I almost feel like these here are a good all-rounder, but not like one of those, jack of all trades, master of none. Like, these Ionics could actually be a one-stop shop, in my opinion, for how well they are. To me, these Ionics are almost like, the Vallejo 2.0, if you will, because they're great for brushing and they're great for airbrushing. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Now we're looking at Pro Acryls. And something I noticed with Pro Acryls, and it happens not with every color and not every time I use it, so it's inconsistent, but you'll notice here as I'm painting, the paint like tries to level itself out, which I think again is why Ionic is also promoting the self-leveling, because the Pro Acryls do that, where you don't get the big tide marks from paint accumulation. I mean, you do, but it's not as bad as some of those older acrylics. Now, what you'll notice is it's like as it's drying, it's almost like these cracks form. Like, take a look at this. It's like you'll see spots that, like, and I'm not talking about the spots that I missed painting. I'm talking about these little specks where I know I had coverage, and it's like the paint shrunk while it was drying, and then I get all these spots. And I've seen this on many models and been like, oh my gosh, how did I miss that many spots? When I'm painting like black areas or something like that on larger models with Pro Acryls, you don't see that at all with the Ionics. It's just something to point out. Now, I know Pro Acryls are really, really popular amongst miniature painters, and I think these Ionics are going to be just as popular, if not more popular, with miniatures once word gets out of how great these things are. But the big difference is that I feel like Ionics actually are better suited for large models as well. In other words, you don't use like just Pro Acryls for miniatures and then you can't use them on big stuff because of the way the paint dries. You can use these Ionics on both miniatures and large scale models because you don't get that weird drying, like cracking or like little spots of white specks or whatever your undercoat is. You don't get specks of no coverage while it's drying, which was really weird. So leave a comment if you've ever seen that before with Pro Acryls when you're doing large areas. It just seems really odd. I've seen it multiple times, and I even recorded it here and showed you. I didn't plan to, it just happened. So, moving on to the blacks. So, I think, like, finding a good black and a good white is always key in a paint set. So, like, you'll have folks that say, I still use Vallejo black because it's just the best there is, and I only use Pro Acryl, Brilliant White or whatever their white color is, because it's the best one there is. And I'm not arguing against any of that, but this Ionic black, one coat coverage, was beautiful over top of white. And then comparison to Atom, which as we know is thinner, it doesn't have as much pigment. The Atom coverage of black is awful when you're brush painting. When you're airbrush painting, it's not so bad, but again, airbrush it's not really comparable to brush painting, at least not when we're talking about the tests that we're doing right here. So you can see you're just not getting near as much coverage, and there's just not near as much pigment in the Atom paints, and that's a lot to do with it. So that was the Ionic and the Atom. Let's take a look at the Pro Acryls, and I'll be the first to say I think Pro Acryls Coal Black and their white colors are great. I absolutely love them. I really do, especially for small details. But again, my point is, if Pro Acryls are great for small details, but that's it, well, it makes it difficult for me to use it in large areas when I get that weird, speckling or whatever you want to call it, where the paint dries and somehow like accumulates, or I don't know, say it not accumulates, but like it like comes together like it has shrinkage, which is really, really weird for paint. I'm just not used to seeing that. I'm sure it has something to do with some of the good properties in it, but it's just not what I want. I don't want to have to keep painting over it, because then I'm risking getting tide marks and other things. But here you can see the Pro Acrylics Coal Black. It got good coverage, but there was still some of that speckling in there, even over just a shoe. But the one nice thing too is Coal Black. Well, nice depending on your situation. Coal Black is a really, really flat black color when you're painting it. So I wanted to continue testing this Ionic a little bit, and I wanted to play around with it. So what I did was I actually painted a larger area. I just wanted to see if it would like level out and how it would look and what kind of coverage I would get in a larger area. So I just kind of continued painting black here. And again, this is the Ionic. I just wanted to see what it would look like. And it doesn't show me the tide marks. I don't see any kind of issues over a larger area. I don't see the shrinkage or anything like that. So I was like, you know what, let me just take this to the absolute worst case. I took it straight out the bottle, no water. You can see I'm painting it on thick. This almost looks like you're painting canvas with acrylic. It's so thick. And I was like, if this self levels, I'll be really shocked. So but I had to test it, because they say self leveling, right? I'm just like, there's got to be something in the properties of this paint that makes it level. So let's just really put it to its extremes. Just put it on really thick and see what we see. Typically with acrylic paints, you would just see it dry and you have like this lumpy finish. But look how smooth this finish is. Now we're looking at the back left of the heel. Look how smooth that is. Yeah, I know it's still somewhat drying there, but there's no lumps. There's no like shaded shadow areas because of big lumps. It's not all dirty looking. Like, I was really, really impressed. I was like, holy cow, this stuff is definitely showing me that it's a contender for Pro Acryls. Again, first of all, we don't have the speckling or whatever that's happening when the Pro Acryls dry, but the self-leveling, like, they claim it and it's happening. There's no weird lumps or tide marks or anything like that as you're painting. So that was the blacks. Now I want to test the whites. So again, I want to test the white over top of black, because this is the most extreme situation. So what I'm doing is I'm just painting over this leg. This is a Dr. Fate leg, because I was in between projects. I had a couple extra pieces, so I just pried them up for this video for you all. And you can see how nice and smooth it's going down. Now this is with a little bit of water mixed in, but it's going down really nice and smooth. And you can see one coat's not going to be perfect. But again, what I have found thus far is 2 coats of white on black is more than enough. And you'll see later, I've painted Venom, I've painted Spider-Woman since I've made this video, and I used the Ionic whites over top of black to do their symbols on their chests. And it's taken 2 coats and looked great. And that's over top of black, because if you're not familiar with those characters, they are mainly black. So here you can see the Pro Acryls are on the right, the Ionic is on the left. Just to show you the different coats, you can see the 2 levels of Ionic coats there. There's 1 coat in the middle, 2 coats on the end on the left side. The Pro Acryls, I noticed there's some tide marks as you start to put layers on, and it takes like, maybe 4 or 5 layers of Pro Acryls to match that. So I did do an airbrush test, and I did record the red color. I came back and I tested the blue later for my patrons, and just gave them an update after I had spoken to Ammo, because I was curious if there were any issues with drying, because I did have some drying issues at first, but I redid the test and it dried just fine, so I'm not really sure what my issue was. But I just used about 50-50 thinner to paint ratio, maybe 40% paint to 60% thinner, because it is so thick, and it sprayed like a dream. It sprayed just like Adam paints. It came out so smooth, covered so nicely. For a thick paint, it's not like Vallejo where it like wants to clump up and then you're like, well, use airbrush flow improver. Okay, yeah, well, I don't want to have 3 different products to run paint through my airbrush. I used the same exact thinner, just a little bit more thinner versus paint, and it worked really well. This next test I wanted to run was dry brushing. Because it's so thick, I thought, well, there has to be some, ability to dry brush because it's so thick. And I'll tell you, I don't dry brush with Pro Acryls or Atom paints because they're so thin, but these paints here, these ionic paints, they're amazing for dry brushing because they are so thick. So you can see I'm just doing what you would do like a slap chop or a shading dry brush with white on black, and just look how nice it brings out those details. I thought that was brilliant. So it's almost like I can just use Ionics for dry brushes versus my Atom Dio dry brush paints, so because they are so thick. Now they're definitely thinner than the Dio dry brush, so I'm not saying you shouldn't use those. I'm going to continue to use them, but just the fact that, again, especially if you're on a budget, these Ionic paints, they're not as expensive as Pro Acryls, which I'll talk about that here in a bit, but they're not as expensive as Pro Acryls. You can use them for airbrush, dry brush, and brush. I mean, that's a one-stop shop. Here you can see, again, more of that on the purple. You can see the spottiness I was talking about with the Pro Acryls versus the Ionic on the left. I did test all these colors, so you guys can pause the video and take a look at this if you want to look a little bit closer at all the colors. But what you'll notice is that in some cases the Pro Acryls are the same as the Ionics, which is what I'm comparing here. Ionics are on the left, Pro Acryls are on the right. The Ionics are typically more saturated, more vibrant. In some cases the Pro Acryls are about the same. But in the end, I mean, it's up to you to decide what you want to do. I think for my money, I'm switching from Pro Acryls to Ionics, and I'm going to recap as to why. I have plenty of colors to choose from. I like the self-leveling. I don't have the spottiness. I prefer the cap. I love the Ionic cap versus the Pro Acryl cap. I absolutely hate the Pro Acryl cap. I love how saturated they are. And the price point, these Ionics are about $3.50 a bottle versus Pro Acryls at like $6 a bottle. So it's almost half the price, which is so much better. And you can not only brush with them, but you can airbrush and dry brush. The coverage of them is great. I've started using them. Here you can have a little bit of a sneak peek at Magneto. I've used them on every single project since I've tested them because I love them so much. So as I phase out Pro Acryls, I'm going to be switching over to Ionics. Here you can see I've used them on Venom as well, and you can see the wonderful coverage you get with whites. It's absolutely great. Head on over to my store if you want to buy any of these paints. I do have Pro Acryls if you prefer those still, but I also have Ionics available on my website at relentlessstormmodels.com. Pro Acryls are up for sale. I also have Atom bottles and individuals if you want. I have plenty of models to choose from and kits available if you want to buy a kit to paint. But most importantly, I have the Ionics up for pre-order if you want to check those out. They should be here in the next couple of weeks. Be sure to use the promo code on your screen to get a discount on your pre-order.